Welcome everybody back here on Segal Talks at the Martin E. Segal Theater Center, the Graduate Center CUNY in Midtown Manhattan in the great city of New York that looks so very, very different at the moment, that feels so very, very different at the moment. And we all do not know how it will be in December or next summer or next fall. We just had Jay Wegman on, who thinks none of the theaters will open in the next season. Perhaps next fall around this time will be the time that we might get back slowly to what we think is normal, how it should be. And of course, this is a situation that is devastating, complicated for so many theater artists, working professionals, small companies, big companies. The Met is closed. They haven't paid salaries for a long time, as far as I understand, and actors and designers, sound designers, everybody is really struggling and will be struggling even more. But there is also a community out there that is deeply affected, because it's also informative years and years of studying, of learning, when one gets closer to a field that one chose as one's life's engagement. And these are students at New York universities. And life has so radically changed for them. Many of them did come to New York because of the great city, because of the life, because of the theater, taking small spaces, incredibly high rents, expensive tickets, all into account. But something that the city offers is an intellectual engagement, artistic engagement, a social, a critical engagement, and a philosophical engagement with life. It's a unique town. It's one of the great towns in the world. Many say the greatest. And now everything is shut down. So the idea of today is to really hear from students what's going on in their mind, what are they thinking about, how do they experience this moment, a moment of remote learning where you even learn and you're taught through screens, something especially in theater is something we would not ever consider as a mentorship, but now this is a fact. So with us, students from different universities in New York City. I would like to thank Cory Tamler from the Graduate Center CUNY, a great collaborator who has worked a lot with at the Segal Center, mostly known also for her work with Amir Fajoun on the performing knowledge. At least for us, they created 2 days now of performing knowledge, of works from students, interdisciplinary, dramaturgies, and there were presentations by students on the work. So Cory, maybe you start, or you all about introduce yourself a little bit, but Cory, so where are you? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, in New York. So I'm at home. I did spend a decent amount of the summer in Maine, which is a place where I do some performance work. So I'm in the PhD program in theater and performance at the CUNY Graduate Center, where I've also done some work, as Frank was mentioning, with the Segal Center. And I'm a PhD candidate in the program. I just advanced to candidacy this summer, meaning that I am essentially working on my dissertation and sort of nothing else, that I'm past my coursework. So I'm not having to take, which I'm thankful for, I'm not having to take any coursework online. I did have to do some teaching online at the end of starting in the middle of last semester. I had been teaching at Brooklyn College in the theater department there. So I sort of experienced that part of the student theater experience from the other side of things. I am in a very academic program. I think we on this panel are really a mix of different kinds of programs that we are in as students. A PhD program, the one that I'm in, is very academic, and what I have to do as my dissertation, as my capstone for that work, is a very academic thing. I work on the intersection of physics and performance. And I'm interested in understanding physics as performance, and what performance theory can contribute to understanding what physics says about reality and representation, and sort of vice versa, understanding science also as creative production. And so one of the ways that we may get into at some point is one of the ways that COVID impacts students in my sort of in this sort of academic field is through the impact that it has on the kind of research we can do and the kind of archives as well as performances we have access to. But I also am a theater maker. I work in community-based theater and research-based theater and performance, experimental stuff, and do a lot of work in Maine, working on this long-term performance project that follows the Penobscot River through the state of Maine. And I'm from Pittsburgh. I've lived in New York for the last almost 10 years.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you, Cory. Sean, if we go, is it clockwise? Yes, so tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sean Anthony Chia, and I am in my third year at Columbia University in the theater management program. I also work closely with a Broadway producer, the lead producer of Drag a Little Pill, as my day job. And I'm in my thesis year, so I'm currently investigating the essentially what theater is in terms of the digital space and kind of the transportability of theater across media, and if that's even possible. Particularly, I'm looking at television and digital capture and like what those audience reactions are, what spectacle is on the screen, and what is going well and wrong during COVID and how people are adapting. I'm also an independent producer, and I work on developing a lot of new work, new plays specifically. But right now, I think I'm really interested in learning more about how artists are engaging in education around the arts, because it is changing so much. And now that live events are on hold for quite a while, what does that mean in terms of adaptability? Should we be adapting, and what that looks like? But I use he, him pronouns, and nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Luke. Is your can you hear him? Luke, we cannot hear you. Are you on mute? We cannot hear you. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I think he's working on it.
Yeah, maybe we go to Gabriel, and Luke, you try to find out what's happening. Gabriel, tell us a bit about you.
Hey, so my name is Gabriel Torres. I'm from Colombia. I grew up in New York City. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a first year grad student at the New School. I study media studies. I have several different concentrations. I'm doing innovative storytelling, which means augmented reality and virtual reality and technology. And I also am pursuing a certificate on media management and community development, creative community development. I'm a theater director. I'm also a community organizer. I work in intersections between technology, performance, and community. What else can I say? I was an actor at some point, and then I became a director. I'm actually currently developing a project that is going to be up in January. It hasn't been announced yet, but I'm doing a residency at an art center on the Lower East Side. And that has different components, from an interactive game online to a performance and immersive theatrical experience on site, where the performers are being film projected on the walls to leverage how we're dealing with COVID. I'm super interested to hear about what everybody's thinking about collective creation and collectiveness versus community. And I think bringing my point with this is how I sometimes feel that the theater community is more like a club than a community, and how at this point the need and necessity of change can bring people together to figure out what community actually means.
Yeah. Thank you. Luke, did we fix it?
I think so, yeah. Brilliant. So I'm Luke Perleberg. I'm a junior studying at the Pace University School of Performing Arts as an acting major in the International Performance Ensemble program. So I specialize in the devising creation of new works in the Jacques Lacaquian style. So me and a group of my ensemble members and peers and classmates have, over the last 3 years now, developed several pieces from scratch. We are just gearing up to begin a new project in the early months of the winter, where we're going to be kind of splintering off and developing a series of, I think, 5 to 6 20-minute to 1 hour long adaptations of some short stories that will be ready to run in repertoire next December 2022. So it's going to be a long process, and hopefully by then theater is somewhat a recovered state. But as of right now, I am currently in Manhattan doing classes high flex. So I'll have a vocal production class that is online because of aerosol, whereas I'll have a Shakespeare class that is in person with masks and face shields that we will conduct final work outside in courtyards in the school or in parks. My Theater of the Oppressed class meets every so often outside in the park because it's so improv based. Whereas my theater history class, like I have later today, actually will be online. It's a very bizarre set of circumstances. I'm also right now working on Stephen L. Giergis's The Last Days of Judas Iscariot, which is being conducted solely online via Zoom. And it's being run through an OBS software to be live streamed out and edited so that we can have some semblance of blocking with these Zoom boxes. I mean, hence the green screen behind me. That is being used for that production. So we're experimenting with how can we do, I guess I would say commercial or, traditional style theater in a digital forum. And that has been quite interesting. I'm also a teaching artist at the Algonquin Arts Theater back home in New Jersey. I work with kids ages 9 to 14 primarily, teaching them skills of acting and improv and devising new creation works. And next summer, I'm going to be hopefully expanding that to include stage combat, which will be a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you. Dohyun, tell us a bit about you.
Hi all. I'm Shin Dohyun. My pronoun is she and her. I'm a PhD student in theater and performance at the City University of New York Graduate Center with Cory. I'm a level 1 student and currently taking coursework. And I moved to New York in 2019, quite fresh and new, but I'm currently staying in South Korea since May temporarily near Seoul. So it's like 1 a.m. here, 13 hours difference. So it means that I usually take my coursework at like 3 a.m. or 5 a.m. It's like that. So I'm still working with my research interest. Till now, I can say that my research interests lie in representation of women and LGBTQ in contemporary Korean theater and contemporary adaptation of pansori, a Tango traditional Korean theater, and the US American Gothic theater. And this semester, I started teaching as a graduate teaching fellow at the City College of New York. I teach Introduction to Theater Arts online. And while here in Seoul, I am a pansori student, traditional one-person performance of Korea. And I started a student journal which is about writing contemporary theater and performance, usually in Seoul. And I'm interested, for today, I'm interested in sharing my experience as an international student who research theater outside the US.
Incredible. So you're teaching online in the middle of the night to students in New York, but you're paid now in Seoul. Incredible. Before we go to these themes, I would like to know, how are you all doing? How are you feeling as people, humans, artists? How are you experiencing this time personally?
I'll go. I don't know how good it's for me to say this, but I'm feeling good at this moment. I think I'm happy to have finally a moment of just reflection and of going back and having to figure things out and experiment and truly experiment and be in a moment where things are changing, that I hope that are changing in many, many ways. And I think is necessary and important. So personally, spiritually, physically, I'm feeling very well. I think there are other things of surviving that are in the air, that's always another conversation, but grounded, rooted with myself and my community and my people.
Mm-hmm.
I can also go. I think I've had quite a roller coaster emotionally with from March until now, and I spent months thinking like, this is it for a while. I'm not making anything creative, or I'm not pushing myself to make to make things. I was just like taking a break in a way, and finding some space in a way, in the same way that maybe you just mentioned, Gabriel, but there was a lot of, I think I was making space for grieving in a sense. Just, I think I was talking with a friend about this last night, that it was a sort of a sense that a lot of things that that I knew we're going to need to handle in my lifetime suddenly are real things that we can't keep kicking the can down the road. And I'm not always sure how much all of the work that I make, or all of the artistically, or all of the academic or other work that I do is part of actually addressing that and not kicking that can down the road further. So sort of reckoning with that to some degree feels, and continuing to do so feels important. But I've also come back around to making things in a way that feels good, and not sort of frantic response.
Yeah, I'll go if no one is dying to go right now. But I think for me, like kind of combining those two, I'm in a very pivotal moment in what theater means to me and like what theater has become. Because I think being specifically in New York and being a student in New York, you get very influenced by like the energy of the city, the energy of the arts, and kind of what other people are doing quickly becomes either your aspiration or your competition. And so I think being at home and starting to see theater online done, very, very low budget or very high budget, you start to see like, okay, like where do I fit within the industry? And then for me, I think I've come to this realization that I only want to return to this industry if it shatters itself when, things reopen. And so I'm starting to really challenge like what that means to me, like what is the value of theater? And maybe for me, that might mean theatricality and not so much the actual art of theater, and like what is community when live performance is taking away. And so I think I've been really a lot of existential crisis in this period, but I also think I've challenged my dreams in a way that I haven't ever done before. And so I think that's why I'm grateful for this moment, but also I want people to be healthy. And that's, I think, my biggest priority right now.
Like,
Yeah, I'll say as an undergraduate major, it is quite a wild time. It is a time when across the board, professors, both artistic and academic, have realized that the solution to increased anxiety in a global pandemic is just fill your students' schedules with as much work as possible, which is not great. It has been a really, really stressful and detrimental major semester across all undergraduate programs. I mean, this is a conversation I've had with peers of mine in my program, across many of the other programs with the people I'm working with Judas, across friends of mine that go to entirely different universities across Manhattan, the Bronx, out of state entirely. I don't know why this has happened this way. It's some sort of an assumption that we have more time now, so fill it. And it leaves, ironically, it leaves a lot less time to let all of those pieces breathe. I'm working on probably 5 different pieces right now. And normally I would be okay with that. But for the fact that they're, in the most part, being done virtually, and there's no sense of space as a construct, so I'll come into Zoom and completely in my head be like, what am I working on right now? What space am I coming into? I've just written an essay and a half and read a 74-page play because of the sheer amount of overwhelming homework that I have. And now I'm coming into a space to work and I don't know which one it is. And it's been a chaotic, really difficult time. A lot of my peers have been struggling. Personally, I have been trying to maintain a sense of, okay, this is how the field we're entering is going to have to be for a little while. So why complain about it? I mean, of course, complain about it. Like, there's plenty of material to complain about, but that doesn't really help experiment about how this new form can be explored. So I guess I'm caught in the middle, is what I would say. Yeah. Well, like, short form, I'm caught in the middle.
For me, I think I'm in the middle of adapting. Like, it was a roller coaster, and like borrowing Cory's expression. But I think now I'm feeling quite stable in a positive way, or numb in a negative way right now. So, and meanwhile, I thought a lot about productivity. Why can't I produce results as I did before? I have more time, as many of you have pointed out, and I also don't need to prepare and commute to the graduate center, which saves a lot of time. But why can't I produce something? And would there be any reason to produce something in such a difficult time? Or why do I research theater right now? So, and with questions of that, I felt quite lost. And it was only after I thought my desire to know about theater rekindled. It's like after I actually came back here and went to the actual physical theater and went into rehearsals. And while doing that, I thought a lot about caring about theater practitioners' effort and labor here when visiting theater that are open, because as a theater research, a student who researches theater, I think it's not only about like researching the theater itself as a kind of object, but it's also about knowing more about community and knowing more about the actual practitioners who are putting their efforts here. But I thought in this situation, they are somehow left out and all of their labors and efforts are somehow erased in the situation that where theaters are open right now. And so because of that, I got to think of the question not only about reopening and safety, but also how we can actually manage theater and consistently care theater practitioners who are putting all their efforts and labor into theater. And I think that's where I am right now, thinking about like researching and actually going to theater and try to like teach theater while in here.
Do you all think it was good to continue, or some said, well, take a year off, take half a year off, or a semester, or you come back when you, things back to the old ways? Do you feel it is something significant still that one could gain?
No, go ahead.
Luke, go ahead.
So I have friends and acquaintances, people I know that are doing just that. They are taking a semester off, they're taking a gap year because of those exact reasons. We can't really work the way that we were, and especially in a program like mine, when it's so collaborative and so working up on our feet, is sharing a space and sharing an energy. And that is, I mean, there's no substitute for that. Online, you just can't read that kind of a collaborative energy. But while I understand the reasons and the prospect of wanting to wait until things go back to normal, I found my response to that being like, I mean, it's not ever really going to be. It's never going to be, it'll be close, but it's never going to be the way it was. I think that everyone living through this is sharing a really, I don't want to use the word special, but a unique set of experience and tools and emotional trauma, I mean, frankly, that is going to forever change the way that we operate in public spaces. So rather than wait it out until, I mean, there's a vaccine and it's been regularly distributed and accessible, and we can start going back into theaters and have normal rehearsal processes, I have kind of operated with a sense of pioneering. Why not be at the forefront of experimenting in this new wave? It's never going to go back to quite the way it was. We'll have that. We'll get back to live theater, of course. But I think that the forms and the ways that we are theater making and creating and showcasing work right now is never going to leave again. I don't think that we're ever going to see digital theater completely disappear anymore, for a myriad of reasons. So why not figure out how that works? Why not experiment with how can we play on Zoom or on Google forums or Facebook Live or what have you? Why not experiment with the forms? I mean, that's ultimately that's our job, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. I see it that way.
Okay, I think Dohyun first and then Gabriel.
Yeah, for me, it's not only about time but also about financial reasons, because in case of the Graduate Center, we have 5-year fellowship here. And also, we can take a year off and freeze it, of course, but it means that I'm losing another chance to do that, having to take year off when I need to do that, when I actually delve into the research and have to do my field work or something. So I think that's a kind of practical reason that I'm not taking a year off. But I think many of international students I know are actually taking a year off, especially when they are MA students, because like they have to pay their own tuition and they have to earn their own stipend to actually be in New York and experience theater scene there. But if they are actually doing that right now, it means that they have to like take all the courses online and they cannot go to the theater, which means that even though they have to like pay like double amount of like US citizen students here in New York, it's kind of like not worth of money that I actually try to like pay. So in that way, I think it's their kind of like strategy to take a year off, especially in case of like MA students.
So many thoughts. I think in my case, I feel like I was a little prepared for the online training. Both because I don't go specific to a theater program, I go to a media program. And for a year, I lived in Hong Kong and I was studying abroad, like online. My school is in New York in the New School, but I was living and working in Hong Kong. So I was familiar with online learning. And the New School has actually, my professors have been really good at training themselves on how to create everything in interactive ways. I go into classes where we have different sorts of activities with online platforms and they ask us how we're doing, and they've been really careful with giving us time and understanding that it's an anxious time and that things are going to be late and assignments. Like my school has been really good at that, if I can say. But I also want to say now, to the question that you ask, I also don't agree in the idea of the old ways. And I truly think that the thought of always coming back, of having a nostalgia of the past in the arts and a romanticism of the past in the arts, is what has put us in a space where the world switches so fast, and we don't have neither the tools, neither the foundation for us to think how to navigate between fast changes. And I think that is not only in education, but in across different sectors inside of capitalism. That's one of the issues, is that we're not being trained as human beings to know how to transform and to change and to evolve. We're being trained to be inside of a cycle that repeats itself. And then when the cycle is broken, then what is there to do? So I agree with Luke and the idea of experimentation. I do think that performance right now is the most valuable. And I think that um, putting things, expressing things through art and culture are the most valuable. Coming back to also what Cory was talking about, how do we propel into the future, into the changes that we need to make. And I think it's a really important time for us to get away from the preconceived ideas that we have about Eurocentric theater making, and then going back into the idea of collectiveness and rituality, and coming as communes and making things happen that don't have to be inside of a box. They can happen everywhere. Theater is not defined by the space where it is created. Theater is defined by the community, as all of us have been talking. So I think that's where our focus should be at the moment. With the online platforms, I also have some thoughts. I do think that virtual theater is something that should be explored, especially because we live in a world where technology has become a third arm to us. Technology is now part of ourselves. So you could say that technology can be presential, but I don't think Zoom and Facebook and those platforms are good for that, because in reality, we're just giving them money back. We're making sure that they just keep on perpetuating themselves and commodifying out of our old practices, which is not better than what we were doing before. So I'm really curious of also seeing who inside of all of this craziness is going to say, I've been taking the time to listen, to see everything, experiment, and now here is a new tool. Here is a new resource. Here's the evolution of theater. I think that's what we should be thinking about instead of doing. Instead of like producing on the spot, rather thinking on the long term. What is the future and how do we achieve the future?
Yeah, I wish that that we had taken the rest of the semester off in the spring. I think and I really feel for what Luke was saying about and I think you're referring more to this semester, but just about how overloaded undergraduate students are with work. I saw it, I heard it from my undergraduate students. I was teaching a theater history course, and I heard it from my students in regard to their other classes that semester, which to me made absolutely no sense. My approach as their professor was to say, I'm here to maintain a semblance of structure for you, if that's what you need in order to make it through a really intense time, emotionally and in terms of family and all of these things. But I'm not requiring you to, I don't know, maybe some of these things I shouldn't say on record, actually. But I really didn't think that it was the right thing to do or the fair thing to do for what felt like, honestly, a sense of some other professors, not personally, because I don't know them personally, but just had the sense that that some people sort of on my level, on the other side of things, were trying to grasp onto some sense of normal and to hold things together for themselves by cracking down harder on the requirements, and that was a way that they sort of pushed forward onto their students what they understood to be happening, with not consciously. So I really wish that we had, for everyone's sake, also as a student myself, just said, like, this semester is a wash. Nobody signed up to teach an online course. Nobody signed up to take an online course in the CUNY system. I think too, what Gabriel was just saying about technology, this assumption that the idea that technology is sort of a third arm for us, that we're all cyborgs in some way, is true, and also it's taken for granted in a way that, because technology is so ever present, we all have access to it, and it's not true even in a highly developed country, in the most developed city of that country. Like, the students in the CUNY system don't have access to, across the board, to the kind of technology they needed to sort of seamlessly transition into these online courses, even if they were well designed. And so that was, I mean, we were just dragging ourselves through the semester, yeah, I can stop this tangent that I'm going off on, but I just wish that in terms of whether things should have continued, I think that giving ourselves the space to sit in what was happening, rather than trying to force things along within the higher education setting. I think we really did ourselves a disservice. And I think there are some other conversations I know at the level of PhD students. Maybe this is also happening for master's students, but definitely lots of conversations with my colleagues, sort of feeling a lot of frustration around, we don't feel supported by the administration and by our funding in order to finish our degrees. And it's always a struggle to finish your dissertation. That's you don't sign up for it thinking it's going to be easy or smooth sailing. And there are always people who, even when things are better, take 10 years to finish or don't finish at all. But in this particular situation, a lot of us are sort of staring down the barrel of a gun where we're about to run out of funding. We're being told that funding is being cut and is shrinking, and so funding our 6th year or 7th year is going to be really challenging. And and adjunct positions are vanishing. And so even that kind of supplementary income is going to be really hard for us to find. And at the same time, they're still admitting a full new class of students. And so dedicating funding to them, rather than finding a way to take a pause and say, like, let's figure out how we can graduate everyone who is already in the program. I think a lot of pausing could be taken.
Sean?
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about resources and what that means for the theater, and how theater has always been leap years behind in terms of finding a way for limited resources to produce not only excellent pieces of theater, but also to reach mass audiences and to provide a very sustainable lifestyle for those artists that are involved in the creation of theater. And I think that's something that digital is kind of training us on, which is like, here's how you can also extend your reach. Here's how you can also involve more people in creation of work. But I think for me, in terms of where I'm at in the master's level, is that I'm really starting to think about the why of theater for a community. And I know, Gabriel, you said that as well, but it's like, I think now we're looking at theater specifically in New York City as part of the resilience of the New York economy. And so what that means for us as creators, for me as a producer, but also as an artist, like, what is the intersection between us moving forward to demand that our city is, becoming resilient, but also how do those artists and how do underrepresented communities with lower income become a part of that conversation? Because something about me really worries that we're going to return 20, 30 years ago when discounts weren't available, when, program for young affordable tickets was not available. And so from the venue owner perspective, something that I beg these people to do is to take a moment to say, okay, we might need to reopen and be at a deficit, or we might not be able to take in loads of cash based on a production. And so from the studying standpoint, I constantly think about like, okay, what is a financial model that works? And no matter how good or bad you are at math, you find out that Broadway theater, specifically even off-Broadway theaters, that it's going to be very, very difficult to even reopen to have an audience. But how do we, because I feel like as a theater community, we were just reaching a point where we were offering a sense of belonging for everyone and a sense of acceptance. But where is that going now? And like, has that come to the back burner now that we are looking at reopening? I see some theaters that are, starting to think about how they can reopen. So that's just something that's on my mind a lot. But I also think from the creator standpoint, it's like, I know a lot of my artist friends who are writers or actors, they're starting to really understand that their work is of a greater value in some other spaces, whether it be at this moment or whether that be historically, in terms of the pay they're getting for the same amount of work they're doing in the theater, but they're getting paid more, working for a company somewhere else or in a different industry. And so I think the people are starting to understand that artistry is something very transportable, and that what theater can do in terms of community building and storytelling is essentially what drives all corners of everything from advertising to medicine to TV to, just teaching English for preschoolers. So I think like that landscape is really exciting to see how it's opening up. But I think what I'm grappling with right now is, what is a return for theater? Because theater has always been something about preserving the past, like looking at the Greco method, like looking at things that you were influenced by, but moving, what is the future of theater if we have to create something new that doesn't involve, the Greek method, that doesn't involve an Aristotelian way of performance? So that's just something that's really exciting right now. And I think lots of people are looking at different ways of involving everyone. I think in terms of the who's in the eye of the public right now, which is, and people feel free to argue, but I think streaming services are right now essentially in the zeitgeist. And I think they are really embracing what theater had, which is the musical, which is, interactivity and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I'd be interested in what people are thinking.
I have some thoughts. So I'm also feeling very frustrated with the administration. I'm a professor, but the administration of my university and funding. There've been some news about how they just cut funding, and what cutting funding meant is they cut the library workers and they cut the professors. Well, the people at the top of my university still getting very, very high salaries. So that's very frustrating. Also thinking of the new school and what the new school represent and why I joined the new school, because I do think that it's a place for social discourse and critical thinking at large. So that's been complicated. I agree, and it's hard for me to. I'm a master student, but I'm paying for half my tuition, and it's going into loans. And right now I'm thinking, like, even if before everything I was thinking, how am I going to pay for this? Now I'm really thinking, how am I going to pay for this? The question is becoming bigger. So I'm even considering, I'm considering the idea of trying to figure out if I can go into a program that will give me a full scholarship this year, or having to decide if I'm able to continue my education or not. That's something that has been in my mind. With the conversation about what you were talking, Sean, about the past, I think something on that aspect is that I feel that theater until this point has always been about education, but education about culture, as you're mentioning. And we are leaving behind a little what is now being called creative placemaking. Just want to put it out there, there is a big summit by an organization called Our Place that happens next week. One of my professors from the new school, Sarah Calderon, is the managing director of this place, and it's a place that has been looking at what are the intersections between culture and other sectors, and how it can change in the other sectors like health, mental health, and then like agriculture and aqueduct and different other sectors, transportation. And I think it's a good time for us to start to go back to that. Like, instead of saying theater is representational, is saying theater is a way of activating community and activating community projects that at the end can end up creating professional work. Like, I think there is this weird isolation between what we understand as community theater and then professional theater. And it comes a little from an assumption that what comes from the community is not going to have the same wisdom as what comes from professionals. And I disagree with it. And I think that community can make professional productions if they're given the tools and they're given the time and they're given the nourishment of making that happen. And there's a big area of getting funds and getting grants for projects that are going to have more practical results on other sectors of our economy and of the different things that we need to be thinking about at the moment.
What do you all think is so wrong with theater, or has been wrong? What needs to be done different? Because I hear from you say, oh, it will never go back how it was before. This is gone. I mean, it's of all the Segal talks, maybe everybody agrees the most here that, oh, I hear from it that you say, we live now in a different time. Our life has completely changed. So what do you think was wrong, and what needs to be done? What is the most important thing what theater has to focus on now?
Well, I had some things I really wanted to say, bouncing off of what Sean and Gabriel just said, which I think somewhat, yeah, it's also somewhat going in that direction, Frank. But I think that one thing that I am thinking about a lot these days is that I mean, in some sense, Sean, what I think you were talking about, Sean, was what theater does formally, and there's also or aesthetically, there's also the fact that theater and performance is deeply rooted in the body and in physical presence, and what we're dealing with is a crisis of presence and a crisis of understanding our relation, our physical, and maybe crisis isn't also always the correct term for it, but it's an upheaval in the way that we are able to safely relate to one another face to face in the same room. And that is something to mourn, but not to get stuck in the mourning of, but to understand how to move forward and to move and how to take lessons from communities that have been thinking deeply for years, many years, about consent and open conversation, but also that performance practitioners have something really, as people who understand the body and work with the body, have something really real to add to, or even to lead in the way that we figure out how to continue to live together in space, and not just be on these screens all of the time. And I think along with that, something that I am just recently thinking about is that I've had a frustration for a long time as someone who does work in community-based theater and in social practice. I've had a lot of frustration with the rhetoric that that sort of like aggrandizing rhetoric that can happen in those circles or in publicity about these kinds of projects that are all about creating an event, creating an experience, giving people the chance to connect with one another, because pre-pandemic, that is not something that was the exclusive provenance of theater or social practice. And it was actually like very frustrating to me to think that you had to go to a kind of art version of a party, that was somehow better than a party. It's actually not the case. But now, you know, I think just as we were talking, I'm sort of thinking that there is a different kind of validity to that claim. I don't see a lot of people necessarily thinking about that, but I made kind of a performative, kind of ritual ceremonial walk in Maine in September with the people I collaborate with there. And we had about 15 members of the public come. We did it at dawn. And we had to think through sort of all of the safety precautions and the things that you really do have to think through now in order to have a public gathering. And it felt like a very special experience, and it felt very like some amount of ritual and ceremony that people really needed, and who came to it. So I think there is actually in some sense a different possibility and mandate there to create safe ways of being together, that is more crucial for theater and performance to be able to fill. And we have, speaking of history, like of course we have a long history of entanglement with ritual in performance, going all the way back to the beginning of time. So there is also plenty to sort of excavate there and learn there from our history as theater makers.
Let's look, I think, Luke.
Oh, sure. I wanted to bounce off of the idea of lack of presence, and grappling with the inability to be in an audience or be fair audience and reach out and feel the power that the presence of body resonates. And just really quickly, I wanted to note, like, you know, that there are ways that we in the undergraduate have been playing with to not replace, but reclaim that kind of a thing, because there is a serious issue with virtual theater with people's attention spans. Sitting in a lecture all day, like I have been for the last several months, it gets really hard to just watch people. It gets so easy to check out, which you can't do in person. It's, you know, because you're there and you can feel that energy and you focus in on the presence of body. So we've been experimenting with that, and my friends who are doing a production of Blue Ridge, which is about addiction recovery, they are like, how can we focus people back in on the presence of body in this performance when they can't feel us? And what they decided to do, not for performance, which hasn't happened yet, but just playing around in rehearsal as an idea, is they flipped sideways for an entire rehearsal. just to make the audience, who in that case was just the production team, focus in on every movement of body and face because they couldn't see it as well. They were forced to engage in a deeper level. And so I bring that up just because I wanted to say that, like, there are other alternative ways to break this form and force people back in on the presence of body. That's not something that we've lost. It's just something that we need to find new ways to do.
Just deepening into what you're saying, look, I think that something that we're taking for granted is that Zoom was not created for performance. Zoom was created for conferences. So whatever tool Zoom gives us, it's gonna be to what is given to a conference. And I think there's so many, like if you think about it, when they were designing Facebook, when they were designing Instagram, there were so many people thinking about what was the psychology behind creating these things, the design and the reasons why, so that they're made in a specific way to be marketed for specific reasons. So I do feel that this idea that we can keep on utilizing a conference platform for performance, it's a little wrong. I think that we should, those who have the funding and the ability to do so, they should be investing on people that can be thinking about what the platform, what software, what the space can look and be like, and what tools are necessary to create this that you're saying. Look, how to recreate presence and how to recreate the what we don't understand that we kind of understand about being together and communication in real time in person. But I also wanted to also say, Cory, that I think even beyond to think about a ritual or a collective party celebration, I think community work can go even beyond that. It's not only the creating a ritual or a celebration, but rather seeing how through the making of theater we can start to understand other things that can be changed in our communities and in our civic practice as citizens. Like even a simple thing that comes to mind, but you know, the things that a stage manager has to deal with thinking about logistics and organizing a show, a production manager, all of these things. That's something that could easily, in weird ways, be applied to transportation and how we're dealing with transportation in our country. And what happens when we are able to utilize our creative thinking to start a conversation with people that may not be thinking about going into the arts, but that at some point can go into other sectors and start to think creatively and critically and creatively. Because it's also proven that citizens that think creatively make better decisions than others that don't. So I think that's to answer your question, Frank. I think that's where I'm coming from. I think that I don't think that is dead, as it's not going to happen, but I don't think that the future of theater should be creating representational stories. I think the future of theater should be creating stories that represent communities, but that also work with those communities to create factual change in the world. And I think that is an unexplored area of funding and of opportunities through other ways that can have better impacts on communities than what we've done so far, especially thinking about inclusivity and diversity and communities of color, that we should be tapping into and thinking, not even implementing, but rather thinking and developing, so that when the time comes, we can start with something anew and a new way of making.
Yeah, Shin.
So for Luke's and Gabriel's point about like Zoom that are not designed for, and that is not designed for theater, I think of how theater can actually tactically like pursue their performance, like in a way of tactical performance, like how can they deal with what they're given, but actually play with that. So we can actually expand and occupy and recreate space for theater that is not designed for theater in the way I think. And I think we still have potentiality in that, which we can explore while we are still like stuck in our like home. I think that's in a way what we can and have to do. But I also think about how theater, I'm not sure about New York because like theater is not open there, but when I came back here, I thought of how theater is failing to be a safe zone for practitioners, and it's not being persuasive enough to be one, because like I think what mostly frustrates the theater practitioner here is a precariousness of the situation. As you all know, we have a phase system when we talk about the pandemic, so Korea is no exception. Theater is not, as I say, closed here, but luckily, but what throws theater practitioners in a difficult situation is those constant changes in phase numbers. So for example, if the government announces phase 2, they have to cancel all the tickets they already sold and reopen it after adjusting the seats accordingly. And the thing is, the audience might not buy tickets again after their tickets actually got canceled. And if things get worse and the phase 2.5 is announced, they got to postpone the show and stand by for further directions, which often leads to the cancel of the show itself. So I think what matters here is a kind of like consensus that is actually burdening theater practitioners when facing the phase change hardship. Because for example, there was one small theater company who published their manifesto on Twitter a few months ago. And it was against Seoul City's regulation according to phase change that stated all theater companies have to put 6 feet social distance between every audience and their seats. And even though they follow all the measures that they were already doing, like wearing masks, like taking all their temperatures with thermometer and putting all their personal information there, and it was kind of like safe while doing that. But I think what theater companies said was that it's impossible to actually do such a like practically, it's not practically impossible. It's not practically possible to do that, because if they put actually 6 feet distance, social distance between like the audience in such a small theater with like 10 people, how can actually they can earn from that, and how can they actually live with that money that they earn from the theater? And I think that's a way of like small theater companies shows some frustration of Seoul City as being kind of like extra harder on theater and practitioners, not like on like restaurants or bar. But I think what's lacking here is how theater itself is not becoming a safe zone, and they're trying to like stand up against some of the like measures that they don't think is like I would say fair, but in a way I think like it's not being, I think, like persuasive till now. It's not being persuasive enough to like actually persuade all the people who have consensus that we have to like stop theater, because theater is kind of like a second thing we can do. It's not necessary in this kind of like epidemic. And now we have to like think about how can we actually persuade those people who think art is not necessary in this kind of like situation. And has been theater persuasive enough to like persuade all the people who are actually saying that and have already that kind of like strong consensus among them. And I think as I said in the beginning, is kind of like lack of raising how labor and livelihood of artists are like significant here, and how they are actually conveniently left out. And I think theater as a community here, at least, are trying to do that, but are not like doing that enough to actually accommodate all those like needs and significances. And I think that's one of the things we can talk about when theaters on Broadway actually reopen. Think about like how actually can theater practitioners be, I would say, protected, but at the same time, how can actually theater be persuasive enough, like to convince all the people who are thinking art is kind of like secondary thing in this pandemic.
Luke?
I'm just gonna bounce off of some of the points that were just made there. Using what I've come across doing Last Days of Judas Iscariot, we're still charging for tickets. $15, standard university ticket price for any of our main stages. And we have gotten a lot of pushback, not from the administration or from within the performing community, but from the university at large, and even like people outside of the university entirely that I just know from my private life that are like, how are you, like, how dare you? Like, how are you charging? Because, you know, this isn't really the experience of theater. And I think we have a unique opportunity to break down the barrier that has been present for so long in our traditional style of theater presentation, which is, this is not a presentation for you. I'm still working. We're charging tickets because we're working. And if you would like to come see us work, then you pay us for our work, regardless of the forum. People have been like, no, you can't charge because the experience of me being in an audience and watching and experiencing this energy from a live performance, that's not there. And I'm like, yeah, but it's still my work. I'm still working live in front of you, for me. So I think that there's this opportunity that we have to break down this barrier that theater makers are more than presentational, which has come up occasionally a few times now, as well as finance and how artists are going to continue to be paid. And I think that that is a problem that a lot of people have come across doing Zoom or otherwise virtual productions of things, or classes even, teaching over the summer. The normal rate for a lot of those classes was upwards in the hundreds, and it was dropped to $60. And I'm like, hey, I'm still contributing my time in artistry and work for this. Why are you shortchanging me for my work because of a change in forum? Like, I understand where the logic has come from, but my work has not changed, and you can't treat it as such. And I think that there's like something unique in there that has the opportunity to change with the form.
I think Frank, before we got into this, and I know there was a conversation with Annie yesterday, but Annie Hamburger is somebody that has been thinking a lot about these things, and what happens when we go into these areas and then people are not getting paid for work. And I, just to give an anecdote, and I may get the dates wrong. It's history from my own from my own country, but I may get the dates wrong. But at some point in the 1900s in my country, there was a war, and after this war, there are two big TV channels, like major channels, and at that point, actors were still getting royalties for the work that they were doing. And then what the TV network started to do is they came to actors and said, well, we don't have money to pay you. So if you want to come and work with us, you have to work for underneath the regular rate that you normally work instead of the syndicate, and you don't have more royalties. And what ended up happening is that people started to take a lot of work. And after taking a lot of work, the TV networks were able to pass a law, ask for a law, that asked for the actors to always be considered independent contractors. And then they didn't have any options for royalties or pension or health benefits or other things. And there was no syndicate in my country to protect them because it was dismissed. So putting that to say, I do think that it's a very important time, and in any type of financial depression and any type of economical depression, artists are, unfortunately, we're the ones that go first, because people don't think we're important. And people at large. And I think people at large don't think we're important because we, through the culture industry, not the art industry, but the culture industry, we've made it seem as if we were not people. We've made it seem as if there are celebrities and then there are regular people. And we haven't made that connection of making people, regular people, also see that there are artists living in every single neighborhood, doing work in every single neighborhood, and that the work is valuable because they're doing work. So I think there's two things. There's like the fight for our rights to be able to get paid and to never stop doing that, because if not, then we're out of the picture. But then there is the cultural work of integrating arts as part of every single other sector in communities, which is what I keep on coming back. And also, I'm gonna mispronounce your name. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But to what you were saying of like getting people to actually understand that it is important, how do we persuade them into coming back to theater? I think that the only way to do that is to making them understand that theater is part of their lives and that it has to be part of their lives for a reason, like music is. And I think music is so good at this. It became part of our everyday life, but we see a necessity in it. Now, what is the necessity of theater to be inside of every other sector of life is on the cultural side, something that also I've been thinking about.
Do you guys at the moment, are you hopeful also with your work and your profession in the future, or did it cross your mind, this is it, I'm going to stop, I'm going to do something completely different? What do you and your fellow students, or how do you experience this moment?
I'd say that in the undergraduate, we're all pretty hopeful. We have a pretty optimistic outlook on the future of the theater industry. Next semester, we are planning to be able to get back to doing live performances and live in-person rehearsal processes. There will be no audience present. It'll be live streamed out, but we will all be together present in the theater working. So that goal, that plan that we have present is definitely helping to keep afloat those of us who are severely struggling right now with this semester and with an entirely virtual season lined up. And I do have class at 1:20, so I may need to step out. Yeah.
I think you have to be hopeful, because or else you spent a lot of money on your education to learn a lesson that you could have just asked a few people about, like how, society works and like what the value of art is to some people, not for others. To answer your question from earlier, Frank, about like what is wrong with theater, I think something that keeps me hopeful is that I'm starting to see the blend between art as work and then art as appreciation. And like, I think a lot of the issue with theater is that for some of us it is sustenance, and some of us it is how we are able to stay alive, both in a figurative but also very literal sense when it comes to money. But I think leadership is shifting, not as much as I would like it to, or as any of us would like it to, but I think there's hope in that the value of arts is becoming more transparent. I mean, as much as we can love or hate digital, I think platforms like Instagram are really just giving people a new value of what art is, whether that be visual art, whether that be poetry. And I think while there are things we are leaving behind in terms of what theater traditionally is, or what poetry traditionally is, and however digital media is changing that, I think it's giving arts a better place in the cultural zeitgeist, which will be really helpful when trying to resume live performance at the mass scale. So that keeps me really hopeful. In terms of a lot of my other colleagues, I've mentioned this before, but I think there's been a resuscitation, or just a stronger focus on how they're valued within certain systems. And New York specifically, I think, is a really great example of what goes wrong when profit is at the forefront of theater. Because I do believe that regionally there are bigger risks that can be taken, but also just things can open and close quicker. Whereas in New York, it's your reputation that dies with the show, and all these different layers that make art creation a very numbing thing that has few moments of excitement that keeps you going every day. But I also think that New York is a microcosm of just the idea of the necessity of the arts and kind of how that can go hand in hand with the livelihood of a city, of a country, of the family. So I am very hopeful. I do think that, and I encourage everyone here to really challenge yourself and like what the arts means to you and like how you are going to use that both either to create work for yourself or to create work for others, but also to understand that what you might love about it may change drastically by the next time you're in a room with other people. And so you understand like that adaptability is not so much a negative thing more than it is something that is bringing the country to a more inclusive state, both in terms of digital accessibility, but also the definition of theater is in the hands of different people now, which is so exciting. And that's what keeps me really hopeful.
I'm glad that Sean brought up profit. We've all been talking a lot about money. And you know, I'm hopeful. I guess a small and also large thing that I'm hopeful for, or haven't given up hope on, is that that theater and performance will reckon more fully with its relationship with capital and with capitalism. And for me, you know, I will never stop being an artist, whatever that means. I think a really major thing that capitalism does to us is force us or try to back us into a corner where we can only convey our identity through that which pays our bills. And I think we also saw a lot of that happen, or I felt very cognizant of this as artists were struggling to figure out what to do, especially in the early stages of the pandemic, how to be an artist and to help their neighbors. And the answer is that you don't have to help your neighbors as an artist, that you can do mutual aid as a human being, and it doesn't need to permeate the entirety of your art practice. But I saw a lot of people making their art practice mutual aid. And I think that's because of capitalism in a way I won't dig deeper into now, but I'm hopeful that we keep exploring that potential for decoupling and uncoupling from that. And I don't intend to ever leave the arts, whether or not that is how I'm keeping my lights on, as long as we have to have an income in order to live, which for the foreseeable future we will have to. I think it's important to continue to also question the logic that on the one hand has been really powerful in allowing people to make a living in the arts and in supporting people in coming into the arts who are not independently wealthy, because that's a huge question to deal with, who don't come from financial privilege. I think that's a huge question related to this, and that's part of the driving force behind saying we got to pay people. We got to pay people a fair wage in theater or in any sort of sector of the arts. That's one thing to deal with. But on the other hand, to say that I'm only an artist if that is where 100% of my income comes from, that's also a fallacy, and one that keeps us deeply, deeply trapped in a capitalist logic that is eating us all alive slowly.
I feel like you just said most of the things that I had in my mind, but I feel like slowly I've been shifting from theater practice into community organizing and community development. but I am a theater person. I'm an arts person. It's what's inside of me. So that's the way that I think about everything. But I come from a low income family. So I really appreciate that you're mentioning this of the arts and how is it to navigate instead of the arts as a low income person. So that has always been lately, that is one of the thoughts of, do I really want to keep on trying to make theater, or do I discovered that I'm really good at organizing people? What if I just get a job organizing people and I like it? It's been in my mind a lot. And also fundraising money. It's always so like I'm gonna say it because I'm in this space where people are watching, but I'm doing a project right now. Ciao, look, I'm doing a project right now where I'm creating a series of different activations and online game for Latinx queer communities struggling with drug abuse. Um, and we're doing a game, we're doing a performance on site that will actually happen, and it's coming with all the compliances of COVID. And getting funding is just so complicated. No matter what you're doing or how you're doing that, it's something that me as a low income person is like, ouch, how do I do it? And yeah, so I'm hopeful about people gathering together, no matter in what format. I think the moment that we stop thinking about communities as social clubs and we start to think about how do we are together because of our needs and how we can help each other, we can make a big impact on everything else. But it requires a lot of generosity that doesn't really happen inside of capitalism. So that's what I'm not hopeful about.
I think most of the things that I wanted to say again is I think covered by like many of this like brilliant folks here. But I just wanted to finally raise a call about international students research and feature here, because like I'm in a lucky situation that I could come here and hopefully can go back to New York this January. But this summer ICE announced that they want to let students come into the US if students as school is not open physically in person or in hybrid. And even though they stepped back with the regulation after all that lawsuits and petition and everything, students, like international students, are still afraid to go outside the US because of possibility that they won't come back, like all of this precariousness, even though what happens in their own like personal life. And things are changing so quickly, and there isn't much we can do about it except for pushing ICE, which needs a lot of help from others. And the problem also here is the first year international PhD students and other students too is not paid at all because like they do not have social security number yet, unless they are currently in the US, and they have to work and study together. And OPT is also so precarious. Some of my roommates had to go back this April because they could not get OPT training job because ICE was not actually giving them out OPTs. So I think that kind of things are happening. And the thing is that we're still not sure what will happen this January. Even like me here, cannot have a possibility of like not like being able to go back to New York this January. So I think that's what still concerns international students and their future. So even as hopeful, there are kind of like dim lights for international students, I think. So I'm still in hope that things will be new normal, but I think this precariousness is something that'll still linger upon not only me, but also many international students. So I wanted to finally raise a call to that.
Yeah. No, I think this is a very important point, and going back to what New York City is all about next to the arts, and that the city defines itself as a closeness to the arts, as theater, galleries, music. It is the international mixture, the great unique atmosphere in New York City. And as we heard from Jay Wegman, visas for artists to come and perform is getting increasingly more difficult. It seems intentional. International students coming here and studying, potentially working here, it gets turned down. So there seems to be a method behind it. It's wrong. that a student cannot get the funding because he or she doesn't have the social security, or might be afraid to return home for a funeral and to come back here, no longer being allowed. It is something we are used from dictatorial states and others. It is completely wrong, and it underlines a point you all made. I think professors and people leading departments are doing extraordinary work at the moment, and I think also at the grad center and at the PhD program, Peter Eckersall and others does. I think is extraordinary. But the administration, of course, is looking at bottom lines. Also, is under great stress. Money for public universities, public education is being cut. It has always been cut. It is so wrong. And we do think that access to education, access to the arts, access to healthcare are fundamental human rights. Jeffrey Sachs, the great economist at Columbia University, said there's enough money around for everyone, for healthcare, for food, for access to the arts, education. It's just the political will is not there to distribute what is there into these fields. It's wrong, and we all hope that this crisis, this pandemic, changes this thinking. You know, that perhaps the military budget doesn't need to be as big as the next 15 nations combined, but that you should, you know, defund and put money from these resources into education, into this, whether it's police or military or others, or the large prison system and industry of itself. Something is so wrong, and I think students are at the wrong end of this as they are artists, and this, I think, has to change. So thank you all really for sharing, to give us a moment of spending in your shoes. I can only imagine how complicated that is. I was a student. I really, truly cannot imagine how it would be to be confined, to not being out to go theater when you study theater, when you make theater. It is so hard. Perhaps even afterwards you will realize more how complex and complicated this is, and the way you deal with this, you know, as Sean said, and Gabriel, Cory, Shin, and Luke. I think it's extraordinary, and I have an incredible respect for that generation you are, who says we want to deal with this. We're going to look at it, hopefully, and we're going to change things. And in a way that includes community, that includes minorities, and as in Hamburger said yesterday, unheard voices in unexpected places, that this is something that is coming up. And I think there's a lot to be said for what you all are engaged in, also using the social media, which we didn't grow up with and didn't really know how to handle. There definitely will be a TBC, as we said, a TAC. There's going to be a time before Corona and a time after Corona. You have made that very clear. I think this is also good to hear for everybody, and that we have to prepare for that. And I think people are listening in a better way than they did before, and I hope this will be contributing to the change. So really, thank you, and hang in there. And nothing lasts forever, as we say here, not the good, but also not the bad. But it is a time to reflect, to think, to study, and to prepare what's coming. Hopefully, we are ready and can be part of the change we want to see. I want to thank HowlRound for hosting us, Vijay and Chia and Andy from the Segal team. And next week, we're going to hear from artists from our Prelude Festival that is going on at the moment. Since 15 years, we are showing excerpts from work of New York artists, work in progress. It's a great festival, first time online, very complicated for us to put up, but David Brun and Miranda Harmon did a great job as curators. It's on www.preludegyc2020.org tonight, tomorrow, but also for 3 days next week. And some of the artists will be with us for the Segal Talks next week. So do we hear from working New York artists who are trying to create work also in the digital realm, how it feels like ERS, and many, many others. So thank you all. And again, you guys, thank you for taking your time and energy and to be with us and to share the experience. I hope you're going to all stay safe, and also tune in maybe for others of our sessions. Thank you, and good night for South Korea. So that's already much.